All right, hello, good morning, everyone. Yeah, okay, the pointer doesn't work, so I have to run to point out to the slides from time to time. But good morning, everyone. My name is Wei Shen. I'm a research fellow here in IDS. My research focus is mainly about the political economy and specifically on China, but also on industrial policies, and particularly green industrial policies focusing on renewable energy, electric vehicles, and so on. But today, we don't talk about low carbon development, we talk about economic growth, and particularly the role of the state or the role of the government in promoting growth, which is still a kind of a debated topic. We don't have any solutions whether state should be playing an interventionist role, or if so, in what way, what can be the best practice for the state to do so, and what can be the pitfalls. And this is a topic that's been debated for centuries, if not decades, since Karl Marx, since Adam Smith, since the debate between visible hands and the invisible hands, and what are the roles. Yes? I'm sorry. The blinds, all right. Let me know if I can manage this. Does it work?
No, this one. Max, it's the wrong one.
That's okay.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, great.
Very good. Where am I? So I'm not here to give you any solutions. I just want to inspire you to think about these difficult questions that should or should not the states should be playing a more active role in promoting growth, and if so, what are the best ways to do it? And what could be the pitfalls? Why we see so many failed cases rather than successful cases? And how we learn from a handful of successful cases in the past 4 or 5 decades? But before we do that, let's do a small game and spot the similarity. These are the countries that you can see. I don't have to spell out the names of these countries, but what are the similarities of these countries? Can you tell?
Most of them are recently developed, like Singapore, China, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, right?
Yeah, recently developed countries. When we talk about recently, it's the countries that actually made it into a high income status. How many of you come from developing countries? How many of you don't want your country to become a high income country? See, that's the common aspiration, right? But we have so few cases in the past 60 years. These are countries that actually made it. And that leaves some very serious questions that why this success? And why there are so many failed cases in terms of catching up. And as you can see, that these are the average economic growth of different countries. And we are in the kind of best time in the history because since 1950, averagely, we are 4.4 times richer than the people in the 1950s. So this is the average. You saw the pointers down. So you can see, here's the average one, 4.4 times. So most of the countries, if you look at their growth rate, developed or developing alike, it's around this 4.4%, 4.4 times, right? They are 4 or 5 times richer than 50 or 60 years ago. But there are countries like this. Korea is here, 30 times richer than they were in the 1950s. Taiwan is there as well. And there are countries like China 15 times, Japan 15 times, and so on. And Hong Kong as well. And for some cases, it's easier to explain. Oman, for example, and also Equatorial Guinea, very small country, just found oil, newfound treasure of oil, particularly, it became richer. But for decent-sized countries with complex economic systems, how can we explain such large variance among countries? And particularly if you look at details of how this country actually grew in the past 50 years, there are always kind of a stable, relatively long period of time, normally 2 or 3 decades, of very fast growth, 20 or 30 years, uninterrupted. That actually made this country advance into the high-income country club. Right? So what can be the explanation of this kind of exceptional cases? And how can we make sense of this kind of phenomenon that for a particular period of time, these countries grows particularly faster than the peer countries? All right. Many, scholars from different disciplines, of course, give different, explanations. Scholars from IR, for example, use for example, the reference of US aid and US support as a very important factor to explain that some countries that receive particular support from the US that became of highly developed countries. Japan, Korea, also, of course, are very strong allies in the post-war scenario. But that doesn't explain why other countries that are receiving also equally kind of a level of support from the US didn't grow that fast. There must be some agential factors within these countries that explain their uniqueness in terms of economic growth. All right? So we are going to explore these puzzles today by asking these questions, by trying to try to understand the explanation of some of the scholars, particularly political scientists or political economists, who are focusing on the role of the government in promoting growth in these kind of exceptional cases. We try to understand the role of the state, but particularly through the critical lens of understanding comparative advantages of the state. Right? Why there are some limitations for our traditional understanding of this type. We'll talk about the quality of bureaucratic system. What kind of idealistic kind of bureaucratic system prescribed by Weber and scholars like Max Weber can be understood in the context of these countries. And also we understand the major theories about, for example, developmental state and industrial policies, and what are the how can we understand such theories and the terms like embedded autonomy, what do we mean by that? And also, if there is a prevalent or chronicle market failures that we're facing, how can state actually address these market failures to boost economic growth? And obviously, the last question about industrial policy is always about integrity. It's not just about the capacity of the state. It's about how can we maintain a kind of high integrity of the government officials to prevent them from rent-seeking and so on, that actually jeopardize the whole kind of project of catching up. But all these are very abstract ideas. How many of you have experienced working in government? Very few. Okay, relatively few. For those who don't have any experience working in government, this can be a very abstract and a dry session, talking about government, state, market relations, policy process, political economy, and so on. So I try to make it a little bit approachable to you by using a case study throughout the lecture. And this is not a country; it's a city in China. Surprise! I'm a Chinese scholar. And Hefei. Hefei is a provincial center of Anhui province in China. You never heard of this city, right? How many of you know this city? No. Have you ever been to? You know this city? Can you say something about it? It's not. Yeah. It's a city that very few people have ever heard of. Compared to Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, these large ones. And for good reason, as you can see. This city is located kind of in the central part of China, right? And it's not a coastal province, which means it is a landlocked without any major ports, without any connection to the international trade. And it is also a province or city or area with very little natural resources. Compared to other Western provinces like Inner Mongolia, Qinghai, Xizang, Yunnan, for example. These provinces, they have very rich natural resources, oil, gas, coal, hydropower, and even wind and solar in the western part of China is much bigger, much greater than in the eastern provinces. So it's like caught in between low-income provinces and low-income city. Hefei is the capital city of Anhui province, but in terms of ranking of large cities, its ranking is used to be about 90 of all the cities with over 5 million people. But things changed rapidly. So in the past decade, it became the fastest growing city in China, which is quite amazing because all the big cities in China are growing very fast. But still, Hefei outpaced everyone to become top 20 large cities now today. So from 90 to top 20. So what happened? Considering all the cities in China are growing at like 5 to 6% each year. So this is quite an amazing story, but nobody noticed that until recently, until 3 years ago. There's a very famous Chinese venture capitalist that he wrote a blog saying, I did my research regarding who is the most successful venture capitalist in China. My conclusion is that the Hefei government is the best venture capitalist in China. Because if you look at their investment record, it beats up all the private venture capitalists that ever existed in this country. So what does it mean? So as I said, this is a place that with no natural resources, with no connection to international trade, no major ports and so on. So 30 years ago, there was a debate among Hopi leaders which way that they should go to promote their economic growth. And there was one set of officials who believed that agriculture, tourism have to play a supportive role for the neighboring, Shanghai and Jiangsu, for the neighboring rich provinces could be the best strategy for them. It's a safe choice. It's their comparative advantage compared to the industrialized neighbors. Others don't believe so. They say, well, agriculture and tourism, no matter how we develop it, without industrialization, with 5 million people and a growing population, we can't make it. So industrialization is the only way, and manufacturing, and it is the only way to go forward. But the problem is, you can't beat our neighbors. They have ports. You can't beat Shanghai, Nanjing, and Hangzhou, right? Which type of manufacturers we should develop? Which type of sectors we need to look at to promote industrialization, if that is the way forward? We found one. So there's opportunity, of course, arise in 2008 when there's a sector called computer screen. Nowadays you look at these LCD screens, right? But if you think about 2008, 2009, that is the time when these LCD screens are just emerging to replace the old ones, which is more or less like box-like, very heavy, those type of things. And the Chinese manufacturers, particularly in Shanghai, in these large cities, try to catch up and try to compete with the Korean manufacturers, and they lost badly. Companies like LG took about 25 to 30% of the market share, and the market, private investors already lost the faith in Chinese manufacturers. They can't just beat, they can't just compete with the Korean manufacturers. But there is one company, BOE, still surviving and reluctant to go. Why? Because they think they have a breakthrough technology. Because at that time, the early days of the LCD screens, they got two problems. First, it's pretty dark. It's not as bright as we see today. And the second problem is that it can only be seen properly when you're in front of the screen. When you watch from side, both sides, you can't see it properly. That's a big problem for TV, because for a computer it's okay, but if you want to have a large LCD TV, you need a whole family sitting around the television. You can't just do it. So they believe that their 6th generation LCD will make them successful. But as I said, the market, the investors already lost the faith in Chinese manufacturers. Hefei government came in. And they said, well, I know that Shanghai government are kicking you out, or shutting you down, because nobody wants to invest in you. How about you come to Hefei to invest your 6th generation LCD production lines? And they did very kind of a careful study on the quality of this new technology. And by the way, Hefei, they probably a poor province, but they got the best science and technology university in that city. So they invited top scientists to check whether the technology is as good as the BOE actually claimed. And they got confirmation from the scientists that this is all really a breakthrough. But we believe that in just about 2 or 3 years, LG will also discover this technology. So if you want to do that, you have to do it now, immediately. So there's a huge debate among local government officials whether they should support BOE or not. And they made a decision to say, well, come and we will provide equity investment, 50% of equity investment. We will provide land and anything else you need. Well, 50% of that production line is 30 billion RMB at the moment. At the time, the physical income of carbon is 40 billion. So it's about it's about over 60 or 70% of their annual physical income. They have to give up their first underground project for 2 or 3 years to invest in that factory. And you can imagine the reaction of people to say, well, we give up our underground to build up what? This? You serious? And they didn't. And 3 years later, the production of LCD in BOE reached 10% of global market. And when they reached the ninth generation of their production lines, since 2017 and 2018, they replaced and become the largest LCD screen producer now today. So it's about 25% of the market share now. So each one of the 4 screens you're looking at, doesn't matter whether it's PC, laptop, or TV, is from this factory. It's from this enterprise. And it is not just about this enterprise. Because the large production line was installed there, you need glass, you need frame, you need all these kind of supporting materials, and other hundreds of companies rushed in to establish the integrated production and value chain in Hebei. Again, with the support of scientists. And that makes the total value of the investment is about 5,000 RMB asset of BOE's Hefei branch today. So from 30 billion to 5,000. Or 500, I'm sorry, not good. From 30 to 500 billion. So that is the claim why the Hefei government is the best venture capitalist in China. Just one case. But they did more than that. I mean, they tried this and it seems to be working. So at a later stage, like in 2016, 8 years later, they found another opportunity, again related to PC. That's the semiconductor sector with the memory chips of the computer. If you buy a laptop nowadays, you need to check out what is CPU, right? What is the central unit, process unit, but also this kind of memory chip is also important, right? Whether it's 8 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes, and so on. It determines the performance of the PC. But at that time, these kind of memory disks also controlled in Korea and US manufactured. 3 leading companies took about 70% share. And the Chinese companies want to just step into the market again. Hefei believe that this could be another good opportunity. They used the similar strategies to establish joint ventures and so on to establish China's first kind of 8 gigabytes DDR memory disk. At the time, the market price of this product, of this memory disk, is about 160 pounds. Okay? But when the Chinese joint venture, when the Hefei joint venture released their memory chips, the market price dropped in 2 months from 160 pounds to 40. Right? As you can imagine, what are the profits that used to share by the leading companies at the time. Right. Again, hugely profitable. And 2 years ago, they tried again, using this strategy to support an electric vehicle company called NIO. NIO was on the brink of collapse again because the Shanghai government introduced Tesla into the Chinese market to build up the largest Tesla manufacturing base globally. So NIO, as a company that also targeting high-end, electric vehicle market, it's like a deadly blow to their business. But again, the Hefei government said, well, I know you're in trouble, come, and we try to rescue you, but also you need to meet certain targets for yourselves. Let's see if we can help you and make you survive. And until today, it's still kind of it's still a case that needs to be proved. I mean, we're still collecting data or evidence on whether it is a successful bid or not. But so far, NIO survived the trauma and its market sales is growing. Okay. So all these cases try to indicate the role of the state that actively intervening market activities by handpicking promising industries and the leading companies they would like to support. And they are kind of lucky because if you think about the risks associated with these projects, they can fail. And many of these deals would fail. But that's how they do it. And that explains, this is the average annual growth in China, the orange bar. And the blue bar is the annual GDP growth in Hefei in the past 4 years. Again, not outpacing the ordinary kind of national average. All right. Any questions? I took a very long time to explain the case to you. I tried to be as detailed as possible because without accurate information or sufficient information, it's very difficult for you to understand the context and theories of technology. Any questions so far? And any kind of puzzle around the behaviors of a city government like this?
Okay, exactly what would the advice cities role in fostering is manufacturing in Thailand? These producing companies and car manufacturing companies. What was the role of the local government there?
The role of the local government first is to provide convenient access to land, tax break for certain amount of years, but most importantly, equity investment, joint equity investment, either in the form of just directed government subsidy grants or in the name of concessional loans provided by the banks at the local level. So in China, we have development banks. China development banks have different branches in different provinces, helping to do this kind of infrastructure projects. But these are not infrastructure projects. These are not roads and railways and airports, right? These are for-profit projects, and the question is whether government should be seeking that to intervene activities like this to boost the economy, to boost the growth. Of course, they are very, as I said, industrialization is kind of a central pillar of the development agenda. We can understand that they are quite desperate in seeking opportunities to provide, to support industries. Okay. Yeah?
This wasn't it the only priority sector of the government that the government wanted to support this particular investment, just stemming all the domestic policies with and the international actors just to make sure that this particular initiative or this project works. So is this sort of a government or the development sustainable in the longer run? Because
we will ask about that. We will try to discuss this issue about whether they're sustainable and when to stop it, or whether we should stop it, or when, if so, when to stop it, right? And of course, this is a big question. It's like, and for these three cases, I think the most amazing of public government is that once they realize that the enterprises they're supporting already take off, they withdraw. They don't stay as a co-investor. They don't stay as an equity investor for a long time. So after 3 years, they withdraw from BOE as a co-investor. So then he said, well, my job is not. You can survive now. But still, and he's kind of partially investing in New York at the moment because probably he thinks, no, it's not time yet. But exit strategy is important. It's not just about when to kick in, but when to withdraw from, because in the end you are a government agency, you are not investing. Okay, one, two more questions. We will continue.
This is a privatization or instead of privatization and nationalization.
Mm-hmm. If you think about prioritization, you're suggesting that before these opportunities emerge, government should have an agenda or a plan for what type of industries you roughly want to support, and focusing on only the opportunities emerge on that, right? And of course, every government has a priority. And the question is that it's not about whether the priority is appropriate or not. It's that who decides whether the priority is appropriate or not. In this case, think about it. If the scientists in the Science and Technology University in China in Taipei say, well, no, this is rubbish. We don't trust them. What would happen? Right? So it comes consultancy, and of course, they also consulted local China Development Bank branch to talk about the financial feasibilities of such investments. So they act just like equity investors. You know, for any equity investors, before the investment, you need to do the diligence report and so on. So they act just like that. They trust the experts, they trust the financial experts and the technical experts to make final decisions. So as long as that is the consulted and coordinated decision, it's fine. But if it is just the government sitting in the office saying, well, I want our companies to make cars, I like cars, then it's problem. So we'll talk about the problem of coordination later on. One more question, we need to move on. A question from this side, I'm sorry.
What about the social pressure? There was not
Social
pressure. Yeah, because you say they only decide to put their budget in that investment, but they can do it without pressuring for people.
Without asking people's permission, right?
Yeah, because it's more easy if you can do that. No, you are the government, and I say this is a huge opportunity. I take it, but you have people on the streets. If you don't have people in the streets, it's easier to take that decision.
We will talk about the role of transparency and accountability in these projects. And I think the question is very valid, is that how are we going to deal with people's dissatisfaction of such decisions, right? But the question is that when the government decided to build up its first underground project, they probably didn't consult it properly with the local people anyway. So political culture and political tradition played a role. But of course, if you think about, we're lucky that this is a successful case. If it turned out to be that the investment didn't work out and BOE didn't make it, what could be the reaction of the local people about their taxpayers' money? It's more or less like a huge dump. Right. But the question to you is that in order to catch it up with the developing economy, is this necessary? So that's a big question. Right? If other theories that I explained didn't work out properly, how can we make sense of the successful cases and how can we learn from these successful cases? Because we have too many failed cases as well. We already know why these cases failed. Okay, let's come back to the basic theories that what should states actually do. This is a provincial government, of course, but let's say we're comparable to mid-sized developing countries. Of course, a central government will be a little bit different from provincial government because central governments have other functions, right? But there's a long debate among scholars of what actually is a state. What is a state? Different scholars have different opinions. For example, on one extreme end, Marxism believes that a state is no more than just an instrument, a vehicle, a tool for the dominant class to rule the dominated class. And sometimes violent. So if you think about prison, police, army, these are kind of violent instruments that state possess to rule. So that's one set of thinking. On the other hand, there's one set of thinking that states are just platforms. Think about Congress, think about all the democratic settings. When people coming into these platforms to negotiate and debate, to get their voice heard, to get their interests established, to get their policies kind of advanced. So state is just a normal place for people to debate. All right. So these are two kind of opposite understanding of the state. But like Chalmers Johnson, a scholar I will talk about later on in detail, is that we tend to forget about what actually the state actually do, rather than discussing who they are. It's always like what people do defines who they are, right? So let's come back to the Max Weber's very old definition about what actually states need to do, what are the main functions of the states in the modern time. Max Weber believes that states are compulsory associations claiming control over territories and people within them. Very simple ones. But what they're actually talking about is three major roles or major functions that states need to be doing. First is to protecting people from invasion, from economic exploitations of other countries. That's the major role. And the second role is to maintain internal order from chaotic, violence and internal instabilities and so on. Of course, people talking about states should be responsible for providing social welfare, which is the certain layers of social protection, social welfare. And many scholars believe that the reason for the states to provide that is originated from its role to provide social protection, to protection of social security and so on. So there is a debate of to what extent this welfare should be provided, much or less, and there's a debate, but there is no debate that modern states should at least provide some layers of protection and social welfare and so on. But it is the third role that are really debatable, that whether a state, particularly for the catching up state, should promote economic growth. And because that economic growth is associated with industrialization, then the question is whether states have a role to play to promote particular industrialization and industrial capacity. Right? There's a huge debate. But think about it. If you admit that states are not just platforms for people to debate, states are not just the tools for some group of elites to control others. If states officers, they have their own agency, they have their own interests, they have their own preferences to do things, then of course, all the policies they're promoting have a motivation, have their own motivation, right? So what can be the motivations for people, for the states to advance in interventionist policy? Why economic growth is so important for them nowadays? There are many explanations. First, in the age of globalization, kind of a peaceful globalization, states are implicitly competing with each other on the front of economic growth. They don't say it openly, but countries, governments that are performing well to supporting economic growth gain some kind of a legitimacy to rule, right? This is, authoritarian and democratic alike. For the Chinese government, that's the only source of legitimacy because they are not elected. But that's the only source of. But even for democracies, governments are doing. Look at the picture. Let's put it this way. Well, it's economy, right? Means that economic performance render a huge kind of legitimacy for the government, for the state to rule. And also, if you think about government's role in providing social welfare and protection and so on, this is about slicing the cake, sharing the cake, or distribution of the wealth created by the private sectors. But you need to have a cake first. You need to grow the cake first before you're slicing it. And then, of course, it's in the state's interest as well to try to enlarge the cake as much. Yeah. So these are kind of the incentives for the states to pursue economic growth. But for neoclassic economists, or this kind of neoliberal thoughts, or mainstream economic thoughts, this could be the nightmare of a country's economy. Yeah.
What do you mean by peaceful globalization?
I'm sorry?
What do you mean by peaceful globalization?
I mean, we are in a time that globalization is mainly about trade and so we're in after World War II, we're in a considerably peaceful time when trade and the international economic relations have become the mainstream main topic. Development and economic development is the main kind of theme for most of the countries. Of course, there will be small-sized wars and conflicts here and there, but that's not kind of mainstream kind of phenomenon at a global level. So that makes the economic kind of competition on the economic front between countries are kind of emerged as a bigger topic than managing conflicts and so on. But for the mainstream economists, this could be the nightmare because state intervention actually shaken the fundamentals of economic theories, the so-called invisible hands, because according to them, in the long run, all the economic actors, either as an individual or as an organization, because they possess kind of comparative advantages in economic activities. So as long as the state can play a minimum role which properly defines property rights, for example, what is yours and what is others, and providing us a kind of a referee role or arbitrary role when there's a kind of a dispute between different trading partners, then it's fine. Leave the rest to the market, and then market participants can sort out what are the best way to allocate economic resources in the most efficient way, at least in the long run, so that the equilibrium can be reached, right? And the reason that this can be workable, the invisible hands is workable because we all have our comparative advantages in producing stuff, in providing services. In terms of comparative advantages, of course, some people have difficult to understand this term. It's like, for example, I'm pretty bad in cooking. I'm pretty bad in cleaning my house. My wife's doing much better in both, right? But in terms of cooking, the gap between me and my wife is not that obvious, right? But in terms of cleaning, my cleaning skill is just like a disaster. So in terms of sharing the role between me and my wife, even though I'm pretty bad in those things, ideally, I should choose to cook and let my wife do the cleaning so that the welfare, the productivity of the household can be enhanced. Right? I'm not saying that I will I'm a better cook than my wife, but that's my comparative advantage. That's not my absolute advantage in cooking. But my comparative advantage is cooking, so I chose cooking. So even so, if you think about between producing banana or coffee and so on, so each country, see, I already advanced my argument from individuals and organizations into countries. Each country should also, according to David Ricardo 200 years ago, in an open trading, globalized world, each country should also follow this logic. That you can always find something that you're comparatively good at producing. All right? And this is particularly true when you think about it, if you're a country that with a large copper mine sitting in your backyard, you'll be stupid not to use it, not to exploit it, to export your natural resources as major kind of income resources. If your weather, for example, is perfect for coffee plantation, you'll be stupid not to think about planting coffee as a major source of income by integrating into the global. So in that way, all the countries will find their best way to integrating into the global production systems. And all these 8 billion people will live happily forever. Before the break, let's talk about it. Any problem with such argument? Yes.
So the major issue with the entire comparative advantage theory is that it believes that, for example, the expert skills will stay in one place in one country rather than moving about. But what actually happens is because when someone gains a relative advantage in their skill, mastery in their skill, they always want to seek better opportunities. So you see sort of this influx of masters of their skill into developed countries, giving the developed country sort of an advantage that should belong to another country. So essentially you have developed countries sort of amalgamating every comparative advantage there is and sort of leaving out the underdeveloped world to fend for itself.
That's a very good point. Did you hear that? It's like, the flow of expertise will be stopped under these scenarios that, what? If I interpret it right, the flow of expertise will be kind of a hold within that country, not actually transferring into developing countries. And lack of skills will lock these developing countries like forever. But the question is, why skills and knowledge that important factor? Yeah.
I think it's all about innovation, the capacity of the developing country to have the resources for innovation. It's greater than the developing country. So the developing country don't have the financial muscle to be able to develop further the comparative advantage that they have. And as much as they are not able to develop it, they remain locked in that state. While the developed country, because of their access to research and development, they are able to advance further, and the inequality and the gap continues to widen.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because the level of knowledge determines the chance for you to have an innovative breakthrough, like the LCD received just now. Right? And without innovation, without innovative capabilities, you can never catch up. If all the innovations happen in advanced economies, how do you catch up with that? But the essence is that if you look at this graph, this is the major commodity prices since 2007. And here is the financial crisis. Here is the Fukushima nuclear disasters, and here are different shocks that are affecting commodity prices. And of course, the shallow explanation is that if you rely on commodities, raw materials, the price will be subject to these vulnerabilities, right? These kind of shock, external shocks. You have no control of what's going on outside your country, but will have a huge impact on your exports and your major kind of lifeblood of the economy. That's the surface kind of explanation. The reason these commodities are so vulnerable, raw materials are so vulnerable, is because this related to the skill argument, because there are very little knowledge and high value skills associated with these commodities compared to, for example, rockets and LCD screens and so on. That's why you're bound. And that's why you can have a DDR memory disk as high as $160 if you have no competitors. All these kind of $120 are paid for the so-called in Chinese intelligent text. Right? And that's why knowledge is so important. And that's why the problem of comparative advantages, the argument, is that they treat it as a given, as an endowment. And how many of you today, as individuals, have comparative advantages of development studies? You've been here for 1 month. How many of you can claim that, oh, I'm an expert in this area, I have comparative advantages of development studies? Yeah? Really? If you said we did a very fantastic job. But you're expecting to possess it in 1 year's time, right? Yeah. Through what?
Knowledge.
Through learning. Comparative advantages is not given. Comparative advantages is gained. An individual need to learn, an organization need to learn, and the country need to learn. Learn something that they don't have now. To learn the skills and knowledge they don't possess at the moment. All right? Of course, there's a risk that after 1 year, not all of you, I believe all of you, but let's say not all of you will become an expert in development studies. There is a chance that you will fail. Small chance, I guarantee you. Very small chance. But that didn't stop you from consequences. That didn't stop the company from trying hard in their R&D department. Why it has become the reason for a country to stop trying. So it's too difficult. You may lose. It's too risky. It's too difficult. You got 80% chance to screw it up. Give up. So most of the mainstream economics telling you that sit on what you have. Forget about, even if of course there's a range that you need to be modest. Right? We'll talk about realistic and modest approach. But that shouldn't be your constraint. So, well, this is what we're given, and that's the way we need to follow. Think about it. In the case of the debate, whether they should pursue industrialization or just provide agriculture or peripheral kind of service industries to advance the economies. That is the central theme. If you only remember one sentence, remember this one. Comparative advantage is not given, it's gained. Okay. Maybe you're just, still don't believe it. just a theory, right? But if you look at history, I will finish these slides before we take a break. If you think about history, it seems that history also echoes the idea of state intervention during the rise of industrialized countries. If you talk about catching up, talk about rising powers, I know China is the elephant in the room. I try to avoid to speak China too much. But this is the elephant in the room. We talk about China's rise, and so on. But let's bring back a little bit. Maybe 50 years ago it's about Japan, and then in the 19th century it's about which one? Catching up. The US and Germany, right? Against who?
Against Britain.
The British, the Netherlands, the Spain. Right? Did they use the new classic or neoliberal economic theories as their guiding principle?
No.
For the catching up?
No.
Right? This is Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton. Who is Alexander Hamilton?
U.S. president.
One of the founding fathers of the United States. And he produced these famous reports. I really suggest you do it. I already had a very long reading this. And many of you are complaining. So that got a chance, just have a glimpse of this report. Report on manufacturers. Because after the independence war, they expelled British. And there's a divided opinion. It's very similar to what happened in LA 30 years ago. Because the southern states, they wanted to maintain a kind of agricultural power, large plantation farms, slavery systems, all this stuff. Because they believe that is the future of the United States. The northern states, they want industrialization. Of course, as one of the founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton, produced this report 9 years after the independence, which basically argued this. Just really very quickly, to maintain between the recent establishments of one country, the United States, and the long mature establishments of another country, say UK, a competition upon equal terms, both as to the quality and the price of the products is in most cases impracticable. So the disparity in the one or in the other, I think it means the quality and the price of the products, or in both, must necessarily be considered as so considerable so as to prevent a successful launch. Without extraordinary aid and protection of the government. So that's a declaration of the US economic policies. Actually, since then, for 100 years, US had a very high tariff system to protect its own industries. That's the United States, but let's look at Germany as well. This is before Bismarck time. One of the leading economists at that time, Friedrich List, also wrote this in his famous essay of National System of Education. Industry entirely left to itself would soon fall to ruin, and a nation letting everything alone would commit system. And that, again, become the guiding principle in the so-called Bismarck pattern, and become one of the key reasons for the rise of it. And this is a very dry theory, of course, but in the end, what are the episodes? Just using kind of examples to illustrate this, and to see how similar it is to nowadays situations, is that, for example, the cutlery industry at the time in the UK is highly advanced because of the quality of the steel, right? And because of the polish and all these kind of, at the time, it's quite high-tech thing. And Germany want to copy. Yeah. So they produce their own cutlery system, of course, the low-quality one doesn't look as nice as the UK products, and also it's not lasting that long. But they actually export all their cutlery products into the UK, branding it with a UK manufacturer, and re-export to the globe with a much cheaper price, and really is a UK brand at the time. All right, and that kind of activities are kind of protected by the government at the time. And we'll talk about that, intellectual property and so on, all these things. And think about the 1960s. It will come from Japan, I'm sorry. But think about the first few models of Suzuki motorbike, directly copy and paste from BMW, right in the 1950s and 60s. Right? So these are the real kind of catching up stories in history. And we should not forget it to talk about the catching up stories for today. All right, I will stop here for a while, for 10 minutes rest. Okay, but before we go, any questions so far? All right, we can save it when we come back.
I want to go back. The Wellington City State. Where I the जैसे आप कहेंगे ना और फैसलाबाद में राइट उसको स्टडी करें कॉपी करने में भी राइट कितनी मीटिंग बोर्ड ऑफ इन्वेस्टमेंट सीएस जो है बोर्ड इन्वेस्टमेंट के चेयरमैन कितनी मीटिंग और डीसी जो है वो Question is for check to Ross is always your friend is there.
Okay, welcome back. Thanks for the questions during the break, and hopefully we can address some of them in the next part. But before that, I showed you a very beautiful, successful story at the beginning. I try to explain why it is possible and why the theoretical underpinning of neoclassical political economics is problematic. Are you convinced? Is there anyone who still don't believe and say, well, I still have some doubts? I know it's true. The traditional, mainstream economic theories do have problems, but look at my government officials. Considering what they have done in the past 5 years, particularly during the pandemic, shall we put our lives in their hands again? Any doubt about that? You're free to talk about this. Yes.
I think, as you mentioned earlier, that it was a huge investment risk, and as she mentioned, that the public could have gone really, public would have resisted a lot if this wouldn't have turned out to be as it was expected of the government to be. So I feel that maybe it was more of a right time, right opportunity kind of a thing. Because if we go with the same model every time, I think there's a huge probability of it not turning out to be well. Because you mentioned that in Shanghai, the similar model was taken. I mean, like, they invested and it didn't turn out to be good. But in Hi-Fi, it did. Hi-Fi, it did. So it could be that, I mean, like, of course, they might have had professionals, which kind of led to a success of this whole model. But there was a huge chance of failure as well, because I'm sure that Shanghai also had professionals to deal with, this, this technology, and they sort of failed. So.
Thank you. Two more. Two. I take one here and one there. Yeah.
I think there is also an element of luck involved in this, because in a country like China, who has huge national savings, China can take this decision. But if a country with no saving at all can takes this decision to invest a huge money, then it's a big risk. And there are also some policies about whose success we can only talk in retrospectively. A country prior to making such decision doesn't know whether it is going to be a successful or failure project. So sometimes I think it depends.
Yeah. Great idea is that even for beautiful and successful cases, we will need to examine its shortcomings, and that might lead to failures elsewhere. And many people talk about the sustainability of such models, that we keep examining even the successful cases to find what can we do better next time. Okay? Yes.
Yeah, I will tell you a comment on the particularity of any economic decision, any economic decision like FI, and on the role of the autonomy of the state and capacity of the state, especially their homogeneity or heterogeneity.
The capacity of the state. That's exactly one of the two questions we need to ask when we think about the role of the state in determining the inflation in the economy. When we talk about state capacity, there's a very kind of easy way to say, well, our government is not capable to do that. I know this is a successful story. Maybe Japan can do that, South Korea can do that 50 years ago. But we have, our special conditions. We have, it's not for our government. It's one kind of exceptionalist idea of those successful cases because they're unique. China is unique. Japan is unique. South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, they're all unique. It's not for our country because we don't have the capacity. But what kind of capacities are we talking about? We're going to talk about that. And also the other issue, of course, you see this picture of a sloth. If you haven't seen the movie yet, I really suggest you can see that. That's the impression of our government officials, right? I think in each country there are many jokes about government officials. The famous one is like two lions escaped from the zoo. They hide in the government building. They ate one government official each day, and for 2 months nobody noticed that until they captured a coffee boy, and everybody realized there were 2 lions in the building. Of course, that's the kind of a common impression of our government officials, and the question is, can they deliver? If they are the guys who are responsible for all the industrialization plans, and they are the ones who need to be responsible to implementation, not just the designing these plans, but also implement it, execute it, and monitor it, to find out the questions during the implementations. Can they actually do it? Right? We have so many failed cases only because the integrity is in problem, the capacity is in problem. We'll deal with these 2 questions again, from these 3 important groups. That's the starting point of developmental state theory. Of course, none of them actually proposed this term. There are 3 scholars in the 1980s. The first is Chalmers Johnson in 1982. He did a fantastic study of 10 years' work on MITI. Anyone from Japan in this room? Okay, then I'll be the expert from Japan. MITI, Ministry of International Trade and Industrialization. At the time, it was responsible for all the economic planning and strategizing of the country. Right? After 10 years of study of MITI government officials, here's Chalmers Johnson's observation. They find the MITI officials are highly ambitious and in promoting economic growth. They're setting up plans. They're not just setting up plans, they're setting up plans based on constant consultancies with the private sectors, but sometimes they don't listen to the private sectors. For example, one typical example in Japan is that in the 1960s, most of the Japanese car manufacturers would like to compete with the US by producing large cars, luxury cars, because they think they are capable of doing that, and the cost will be much lower, and they can just beat up the US car manufacturers. The suggestions from MITI at the time is to produce smaller cars, more efficient ones, cheaper, and so on, and to advance both in the American market and the European market, which turned out to be a huge success. A differentiation strategy is not proposed by the car manufacturers, but by MITI officials. Right? That's just one example. And they are more or less like a steering agency or the brain of the industrialization plans. They don't just handpick industries, but they develop subsidy programs. They develop how much they would like to subsidize, how long they would like to subsidize, how much loans need to be provided to each sectors, and what are the concessional rates of the bank loans. And all these type of very specific decisions were crafted within MITI. And there are we will talk about institutional arrangement later on. So Johnson believed that the role of MITI and the jobs they're doing are the major contributing factors for Japan's rise, miraculous economic growth in those decades. If you see the chart here, I'm sorry, you can see that here's the growth rate of Japan in those times. Okay. Of course, Johnson was a political scientist. He didn't expect, of course, that touched such kind of argument, touched, as I said, fundamental principles of neoclassical economic mainstream theories. So he was attacked, and questioned, and so on, until 7 years later, there are 2 other books. Again, case studies on South Korea and Taiwan was published by Armstrong and Robert White, another 2 giants of the world works of developmental state, reaching very similar conclusions because it's, again, focused on government officials capping Korean Economic Planning and Industrialization Committee, and also CEPD, China Economic Development and Economic Planning and Development. So very similar roles, very similar jobs, and very similar behaviors, and very similar growth rates. So when we come back, these 3 case studies together, we reached that conclusion is that maybe that kind of conclusion makes sense, that having a centrally kind of a highly ambitious and a professional central planning committee works. Right? That is a major contribution of their works. And the amazing findings of these books is that they are not just making the right decisions from time to time, they are quite autonomous in making decisions, even though they are working with these large corporations. They are not that kind of corrupted because, for example, or captured easily by these large corporations. Because think about the power of Tsubaki in Japan. It's hugely powerful after World War II, right? So they can have kind of independent decisions when they say, well, they want Japan to move into small car industries and so on. In Korea, it's the same thing. Like nobody would like to venture into the shipbuilding industry. It's too risky. And also in Japan, for example, the high-speed train industry. Nobody would like to invest in high-speed train anymore. Everybody's looking at airplanes and airports. These are the areas that the private sector would like to go for. Nobody would be remotely interested in building a high-speed train, but Japan did that. Shinkansen, right? And so those examples make people believe that they have some autonomies to avoid being captured by private sectors. Yeah.
I would like to know in this example, maybe in Japan, what's the role of when party changes? Sometimes an entire project or entire program is stopped due to the rotation of like a new party after a change of government. So I am interested in understanding what was the role when the government changed in these like East Asian miracles, when maybe the project of the economic growth maybe has been stopped when the government changed.
Good question. In terms of the high-speed train in Japan, it's quite dramatic because, as I said, even the public and the financial sectors are not actually believing in the high-speed train. But one of the ministers, I forgot his name, they secured loans from the World Bank, and he claims it's not high-speed train, it's just a renovation project, but he's secretly developing a high-speed train, and soon later on discovered by the public, and he was sacked. But at the time, it was too late to stop, and then the project was finished. So leadership matters. So even in the inauguration ceremony, he was kind of he was not allowed to attend all these type of things. And so there are some kind of coercive and authoritarianism within it. And in South Korea, it's the same. I think Park Chung-hee at the time, Park Chung-hee, sorry, I can't pronounce his name in English, was a dictator. And the first kind of a 5-year plan that he launched was not liked by his peers, and he had put somebody into the jail. So if you don't agree with it, think about it in that place and come back to me 2 weeks later. Right? And these are kind of whether they're helpful or not, but that really avoid the problems of changing governments and the interruption of kind of long-term kind of strategy that need to be crafted out. But there are other ways to do that. Of course, the dictatorship or authoritarianism is not the only way, and probably not good way, to maintain a stable policy. Right? The observations they have, these 3 authors, based on their observation of ET, KP, and CEPD in Taiwan, is kind of in line with the previous prescription of Max Weber, again, on the so-called ideological or ideotype bureaucratic systems. So, in Weber's idea that the prototype bureaucratic system should have the following characteristics. They are specialized, they are experts, they know what they're doing, And their recruitment is based on merit, not kind of a crony relations or this type of, it should be based on kind of open competition, based on merit. And, the promotion, transfer, and also the placement is kind of should be institutionalized. There should be clear rules of the role assignment among these bureaucratic officers. And the salary should be hierarchy, and more or less like military system, and the lower level bureaucrats need to obey the order from the higher level, and they should have this kind of responsibility and accountability systems within the bureaucratic system, and more importantly, there are many other rules. This should be highly respected in society. And this is quite interesting thing is that why it is so? Because if they are not highly respected, they will be easily captured by private interests. And I'll explain later on when we talk about Japan and a little bit about China as well. So Max Weber believed that having this type of modern bureaucratic system is the foundation of modernization, economic modernization. And he believes that such type of bureaucratic system, at least at that time, is nowhere to be found apart in Western countries. And here as well. In a way, that if you look at East Asian bureaucratic systems with thousands of years of traditions, some of these countries already have a bureaucratic systems with such features. And even today, the most challenging, with Chinese love exams, but the most difficult exams are the ones that try to get into the bureaucratic system, the public official exams. It's the most challenging in China. It's about less than 2% of chance that you can get into the official systems by just taking exams. Less than 2%. Even college entrance examinations are much easier than that. Okay? And in Japan, it's the same thing. And Korea is probably the most radical system if you want to get into the public sector, right? And the selection is based on merit, largely. You have some rank seeking, quality relations, but that's largely properly managed. And so as you can see the picture, this 900 AD in Tang Dynasty in China, these are royal examinations that grassroots scholars can get a chance to win and pass these exams and get selected as government officials directly by the emperor. So it's been there for a long time. But Johnson's idea is that the Meiji system that he observed in Japan is largely inherited from the Meiji restorations in Japan in the previous century. And the political elites in that country is highly respected and very similar to the Chinese experience. Is that Chinese officials are highly respected compared to the private sectors. The private sectors are always kind of suppressed and so on, and they are not allowed into the official level. So if you're kind of a son in countryside, son of a large landlord, you are allowed into the bureaucratic system. But if you are a son of a large businessman, you are not allowed to take those exams. The business people are kind of separated from this official, and they are kind of treated as a kind of lower class than the officials. So very similar in Japan's tradition as well. So that can explain why these officials would like to take advices from the private sectors but not easily captured, because they think they are wiser than the private sectors, because they think, why should I listen to you? Right? For hundreds of years, there is no such a tradition that I should listen to you. So this explains the behaviors of these government officials. But that's just a few case studies. So the problem of case studies is that they provide you a very vivid, detailed account of what's going on, but you need some theorization out of it, because after that, it's there was in the 1990s It's the case that is just of developmental states just spreading out into many different countries in Africa, in South America, and even Russia, and so on. So with more and more cases emerging, seemingly indicating the same thing, that active role of the states leads to economic growth, then how can we theorize? So two leading scholars, Peter Evans and Linda West, made fantastic contributions. I think they published in the same year, actually. They published their books I think 6 or 7 years later than the first 3 volumes. They developed 2 very similar concepts. Linda West called it kind of a controlled interdependence between the state and the private sectors. And Peter Evans' term, a more kind of popular nowadays, is called embedded autonomy. Right? Actually, they're talking about very similar things. Is that they think the connection between the state and the private sector to developing industrial policies are very close, but how the closeness is not the thing. Is that such closeness is institutionalized. It's not random. It's not like, I know you well, I give you a call in the middle of the night, say, well, we will provide you a subsidy in the next 2 months. It's nothing like that. Right? They have personal relations, of course, but all these connections, communications, consultations are institutionalized. Right? In terms of, for example, regular reports from the private sectors, regular briefing meetings of these government agencies together with private sectors as well. And even in some cases, you have government officials actually taking the office within those companies, sitting there and collecting data, observing the operations of these companies, and so on. So that is how symbiotic and institutionalized these networks can be. And that, they believe, is that why it's embedded autonomy, is that the relation, how do you say, the state agencies, the state officers are really embedded in these industries they're trying to govern. It's not kind of a detached governing system that is sitting in my office, giving a call, and so on. It's really, they are really kind of immersed with all the information of industries communicating on institutionalized, relying on institutionalized arrangement. So this, in the West's observation is that all these case studies have these kind of characteristics that they need each other. Private sector needs state guidance, but state actors need what?
Coordination.
Coordination of what?
Of their engagements, the market forces.
Mm-hmm. They need to. The private sector need government to give them kind of a role, kind of allocation, right? And also, they need information. Mm-hmm. If I want to support car manufacturers, if I want to subsidize car manufacturers, how much I should give out? 3 billion to each, 2 billion, 3 years, 2 years. It must depend on data. Where's the data come from? I need to collect data constantly to make calculations and correct the data, accurate data, right? From the industries I govern to give out proper figures and to change figures. If I gave 3 billion and it turned out to be too much, the next 2 years I need to change, right? All these are based on data resources, so they are interdependent. I need your data, I give you guidance, and so on. So this kind of a controlled interdependence, or in Peter Evans' term, embedded autonomy, they believe is the key for the success of a developmental state. Okay. And also, in terms of another thing, embedded autonomy try to address 2 major issues at the same time. We talked about state capacity, we talked about state integrity, and why institutional arrangement address these 2 issues at the same time. Think about it. If it is an institutional arrangement, it could be as transparent as possible, at least among all the actors that are trying to govern, right? It's very difficult to develop a kind of a rent-seeking opportunities with me in particular factory. Because all the meetings need to be transparent with all the car manufacturers, with all the financiers presented in the meeting, and all the regular reports should need to be go through all the bureaucratic systems. It's very difficult for me to seek rent-seeking opportunities by myself, even if I'm sitting in charge of giving out subsidies and so on. So institutions constrain people. That's all. We talk about institutions all the time. What is the institutions? What's the purpose of the institution? Institutions were set up to constrain people. They are the rules to regulate people's behavior. So once you have this institutional arrangement, it can control. It will never eliminate, but it can control in a way the corruption around seeking opportunities. That's one thing to target integrity issues. In capacity issues, coordination, information processing, all these help to enhance the state capacities in dealing with the industries. I don't believe that from day one, the media officials will be more capable than kind of a long, mid-aged engineer in car manufacturers to regulate car industries. Of course, it's a learning process for them during this institutional arrangement, during the daily engagement, they need to learn. And they need to develop their capacities to regulate the industries they want to support. Okay, so institutional arrangement try to address two things at the same time. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
I'm wondering on this seems like an ideal situation.
Yeah.
And you've got certainly there is no rent-seeking, there is no corruption. But I mean, failure of it hasn't been adopted by all developing countries.
Yes.
Not successfully. So what I understand that there are unique and but I'm trying to understand what is the one factor that makes it work.
All these theories can't beat greed. Right? All the theories that we have can't beat greed. If your starting point as a government official is not for economic catching up, you're just trying to use it as a pathway to maximize personal benefits, of course all these theories will be in vain. Right? But you can't eliminate even remote opportunity or chances that there are still government officials who seriously would like to do that.
My question is about like the feature of the in Korea, Taiwan, and Japan at the time. There was a focus on growth, but there wasn't a focus on income distribution and on welfare.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if during that period of growth were people like having access to basic rights in a first period of time, like healthcare, education, and so forth, or did they come after the growth years?
There was if you look at Haji Chang's work about how Korea intentionally suppressed labor wage for a very long time to make their industries competitive. Yeah. That is the one way to show that for countries at that particular stage, they prioritize growth over distribution. But the argument is that you can't hold that for too long. Right? There will be a time for you to have to release this type of pressure on labor wage and the labor rights and so on. And also that's why when we talk about accountability, is that when to release. It's like if you don't have accountability system for your industrial policy, whatever supporting policies you would like to make, then it's problematic. It's like you try to achieve economic growth, but the disaster will be that the growth didn't achieve, but the labor wage was suppressed and labor rights was destroyed. So that is the roster scenario. But even in an ideal scenario that you do have some growth, but it's partially based on suppressing the labor rights, and you need to adjust it at a later stage. And that adjustment should be based on accountability system, which means that the performance of the policy needs to be constantly checked. If my intention is for you to grow, to win about 20% of market share in 5 years' time, if you didn't make it, I'm sorry, I will give up. and I will withdraw. So there must be some very clear criteria and priority at the same time. I give you carrots, but at the same time there must be some sticks as a balancing mechanism. Okay, these are the major two concepts of from the West and the future events. Still, of course, when then that's the inception of developmental state theory, and then the theory has been, of course, criticized, as I keep constantly saying. Well, many people still are not convinced that such model really can be workable in other contexts, and they also raised strong empirical examples and empirical evidence that all these countries are hugely corrupted during this economic growth. It's not like the meaty government officials are like angels. They're not. And Catholic officials in Korea are highly corrupted as well. And even the government at the time, the South Korean government, is so corrupted at the same time. Taiwan is the same. So how can we explain that? Right. So they're constantly challenging the assumptions of developmental states. And also regarding the government capacities, they're also kind of questioning whether it is these meaty government officials are really the smartest guy in the room. They really, based on the information they have, they can really make smart decisions all the time, and so on. So this kind of a debate continues. And Paul Krugman, for example, he still believes that it is helpful in a very short period of time, but even if we can keep one generation at a decent and so on, we can't make sure that the next generation will act like the same one. Similarly ambitious, similarly faithful to the national goal, and devoted to the public goods and so on. You can't expect that one generation after the other. Right? So there must be a kind of temporal thing we're talking about. But these type of critics are not really touching the real problem of the so-called first generation of developmental states. What I think is the real problem is that's probably the problem of all the case studies in early days in particular. So they have observation one, like robust economic growth in particular 2 or 3 decades, right? That's this first range. Then the second observation is the behavior of these government state officers, right? They think they are correlated, but they also believe that there's a causation, that government officials' behaviors leads to economic growth. But the causation may not be there, right? You can't establish just the causations, causal relations between these two observations without any stronger evidence. There might be some other intervening factors, for example, the support of the United States, right? That play a bigger role. So the right question, again, come back to the original one, is why some interventions works while others fail. And think about this, how complex the situation is. I study China for too long. Even for China, for example, some sectors, they're doing very well in terms of promoting industrialization. For example, renewable energy, solar industry, particularly. So the industrial policies really work very well. But if you look at the way they promote cars, the automobile industry, it's like a disaster. So even within the same country, how can you explain that some industrial policies work while others fail? Malaysia itself is the same thing. Philippines, we also have this type of this contradiction. Is it really just about developmental state? Then why the same state creates such various outcomes within the same bureaucratic system? So the right question is to answer is always sectoral based rather than state based. So if you want to write an essay about developmental state, don't say, well, I want to run, let's say, about developmental state in the Philippines. Okay, tell me which sectors you would like to focus on, because that is the proper question. If you talk about at a country level, it's very difficult for you to unpack the causations between institutional arrangement and the outcome of the policy, right? So Pompeo, for example, he's the first, I think, who realized this question, this problem. He said, well, if institutional arrangement is so important, then we need to focus on institutional arrangement within a sector, or at least around the sector, rather than around the country. Because the explanation for the variation between renewable energy and ultimate biomass is because they're governed by different ministries. And different ministries have different capacities, and different incentives, and different level of integrity. All right? So you need to unpack all these details to understand which type of institutions worked, and which type of institutions failed. Right? These are more relevant questions. Okay. So, any questions? Okay. So the theories of developmental state have been challenged, have been developed constantly. There are two great thinkers, economists mainly, actually advanced this theory further. And we will have a look of these two guys. Stiglitz is the first. Stiglitz is the first I would like to talk about. It's kind of the most fervent opposer of the current neoclassic economics thinking. As you can see, the reason that the invisible hand often seems invisible is that it's simply not there. Why he says that? I know it's a very cool sentence. It's pretty cool. So what does he mean? What is it? Why he said, well, it's not there? Because when we talk about, well, the invisible hand is not really there from time to time, is because we have market failures, right? Market is not, good at to deal with all kind of externalities, sometimes positive, more negative in many ways. That's why the invisible hands are not as efficient as we thought in coordinating economic activities. But Stiglitz is the only kind of the first person to say, well, because the prevalence of market failure, or the significant extent of market failure is much bigger than we thought. It's not like, sporadic or, from time to time. It's like it's always there. Why it is always there? Because the market failure is about information and knowledge that we've been talking about. What do we mean by market failure? It's about knowledge and the information. And think about this. We say, well, state is a source of kind of investment or support, or kind of a source of technology to catch up and so on, and even a source of innovation. And the question is why private sectors can't provide such level of innovative capacity, as they always do. The most fantastic innovations that we have, some of them are supported by the states, and many of them are actually developed by private sectors. And why information knowledge became such an important thing here is, I think that's pretty obvious. It's like when private companies, private sectors are producing knowledge and innovations, they don't want to make it a public good. They want themselves as the only learner in this field to stay in competitive positions. Yeah? But if your purpose is to promote knowledge or try to meet the knowledge gap between developed and developing countries or whatever, you have to treat knowledge gap as a public, or you have to treat knowledge deficiencies as a public goods that you need to provide. And one example is, there are many examples, but one example is that how companies would like to hide information about market access and so on, in particular profitable markets, And for example, I'll give you one example. The information on South Africa's wind market. I think 10 years ago, South Africa is the first African market, a country that developed the wind procurement programs that attracts many, many Western companies. But the Chinese companies don't have any information about it because most of their attention is in domestic market, right? And only one company realized it, Goldwind. They are the first who noticed because they got some inquiries from their American partners saying, we'd like to provide turbines there, we have new projects. And they realized, well, there's a new market opening up in South Africa, it could be big, but Goldwind is not capable of capturing the market. They never share any of this information to anyone, even if they are not capable of exploring the market at the time. And it is the China Development Bank actually sensed the opportunities and spread out the news through the Agency of National Energy Administration. Again, through an institutionalized arrangement that makes such announcement that we will have a new market opening up in South Africa. And then Guotian and other 2 or 3 Chinese companies realized it seriously stopped building and investing in South Africa. This is just one example between the difference between private information and public information as public goods, right? And such things always happen, and it's so prevalent. And speakers say, well, that's why you need state to coordinate market and provide market to provide information and knowledge for its management. Right? And this is exactly the example of 2. It's like information search and dissemination is a public good. Market creation and identification. It's all these actual points can be illustrated by the example I just mentioned. Right? And he said, well, he finally advanced his argument even further. It's like the gap between developing and developed countries is never just about economic resources, but about knowledge. So essentially, catching up is about learning. It's about how quickly you can learn. As a group, as a society, and state is a much important actor than we thought in providing or in creating a learning society. Okay? That's his terminology. It's like creating a learning society, you need input of this thing. Right? That's sequence. Focusing on the externality of the information and knowledge, and talking about catching up as a process of learning, and the role of the state to create a learning society. That's his 3 key points. Roderick, globalization guru. Anyone from globalization program? Great. If you enroll in the globalization program, the globalization, how to say, have a huge impact on national policy making. Right? One of the rising constraints of nowadays of national governments to develop industrial policies is they have to face the constraints from global rules. For example, a typical example, again, related to renewable energies. And in order to develop renewable energies, you need government subsidies, right? Because until recently, renewable energy was pretty expensive. You need government subsidies on panels and so on, typical industrial policy. But it is against WTO rules. But you can't subsidize a sector and become a major export of your subsidized goods. So there are many, many trade disputes around solar panels, around wind turbines nowadays, because countries like EU and US constantly complain that Indian panels, Chinese panels, they're too cheap, right? They're hugely subsidized by their governments. But that's the intention, to create a national kind of a competitive kind of flagship renewable industry. So there's an inherent kind of a competition or friction between globalization and national autonomy. We talk about embedded autonomy. So that is one thing that you need to consider when think about crafting national industrial policy. But also, Roger mentioned that the other key issue of market externality, apart from the information that mentioned by Stiglitz, is the coordination. It's how to, because think about Hefei. Again, let's revisit Hefei. And we think about the success of this case. It's not like they chose the right company or right industry. It's like how they coordinate all the actors, from scientists, from financial sectors, from the upstream and downstream factories, from the landlords, from everyone to get this deal done. It's a tremendous effort. And no private sectors would like to do that, normally. And think about it, if you want to develop a car manufacturer, let's say in Sri Lanka, in the middle of nowhere, and what's your biggest concern? Is that subsidy you want? The government said, well, I'll give you a subsidy. How about that? It's not really the subsidy. It's like, where's the glass? Where's the tires? Where's the steel I need? Right? Where's my suppliers? All this stuff are missing. And how can I develop a car manufacturer out of nowhere? And that is about coordination failures, often seen in the market. And you need someone to coordinate that, to provide all these kind of networks you need to build up. Because otherwise, nobody would like to do that. Right? So this is also rampant and prevalent, so that coordination and information come together as such big kind of an issue of market failures. That again echoes the argument of the invisible hand, but not always there. Right. And Roderick is also the first who emphasized on the accountability and the transparency of the industrial policy. I think it is a huge advancement of a previous generation of developmental states here. Because if you read Stephen Hunter's book, I think he got a section to talk about relations between authoritarianism and industrial policy. And there's still a kind of ongoing debate on whether authoritarianism or authoritarian government approach is more suitable to advancing industrial policy, which I don't agree. Because, Roderick's argument is very clear. It's that once you provide subsidies to a private sector, either in the name of PPP or whatever, because you're trying to address a market failures, provide information as a public good, to coordinate as a public good, the value created by you and your business partner is no longer a private asset. It is a part of a public asset as well, and you need to take care of the consideration of the people. And at least let them be informed. Of course, there is such level of transparency. It's the transparency and accountability. It doesn't mean that you give everybody veto power to stop you, because that is not possible. Right? Because you need certain level of centralized policy making. But that centralized policy making needs to be complemented with a structured system as possible. We need to let you know what are we doing. We need to explain to you at least why we stop building underground in the next 2 years, why BOE is so important to us, and so on. And we need to show that this is a risky business. We fail together, but that's the only way we can move forward. If you don't agree with me or not, that's the thinking, but that's at least the transparent, because it's your money. Right? So that, and also we need to show that we have an exit mechanism. It's like an accountability system, and if they didn't perform as they promised, we will stop. We will stop in what years and so on, and make everybody kind of relax, because the real problem, as he said, is not like, let's read this. What determines success in industrial policy is not ability to pick winners, because you tend to pick the wrong ones again and again. It happens. You're not the smartest guy in the room. You can make mistakes. But when you make mistakes, you give up, you quit. You say, well, I messed up, I'm sorry, I will do better next time. All right, just like all the investors do. If you think about all the equity investors, the chance for them to have a successful investment is never beyond 20%. So out of the 10 project, 8 will fail, and 2 will become extremely profitable and make a profit. The same thing. Here is that you need to admit that you can make mistakes. And the arrogance is the biggest enemy of the industrial policymakers. Right? All right, 1 minute to I keep on emphasizing the key points. So you're already familiar with this. States do have agencies, particularly for a catching up economy. State agencies need to be encouraged. So they should have some agency to take risks to catching up with developed countries. Such ambition and such agency need to be protected and encouraged. But the industrial policy of developmental state is about identifying market failures and address them. And that's the starting point. It can be the market failures associated with information or coordination or both. But you need to identify them first and think about the ways to address them. That's the starting point of industrial policy. Without addressing these market failures, your policy will fail. So for capacity-related questions, very specifically, which sector, how much, how long, and so on. For integrity-related questions, transparency and accountability, process, justice, all these kinds of questions. So that is the specific questions you need to ask if you want to write an essay about industrial policies. Yeah, I think that's all for today. Thank you very much.